Hi everyone, welcome to the Church Explained podcast. This is our bite-size edition, and we're going to revisit a conversation we had with our lead pastor right here at Icon Church with Paul Benger back last year. And we chatted with Paul around this subject where he spoke into every leader has their levers. That means people who leave you, not a lever or a lever, as some would say in America, but every leader has their levers, people who will leave them. And in this conversation today, we chat with Paul around this idea of how should we respond when people leave? You know, how should we respond when people leave the church? How should we respond when people leave your team? How should we respond when people leave? And I think the principles that Paul shares speaks right into all those different contexts. So I want you to get ready, listen, learn, and be inspired. And we want to say thank you to Paul Benger for his wonderful insights on this topic. Enjoy.
I think it was an American statistic, even around the COVID season, that so many pastors, I can't remember what it was.
7 out of 10
pastors were looking for a new job because of this feeling of discouragement, disappointment. And, you know, even just linking it to this is that many pastors have felt, using the term, ghosted.
Yeah.
Because they've not been able to see the church. They don't know if they've been connecting online.
Are they coming back?
Are they coming back? They may have had some people who leave, and they might be feeling, and you might be listening, watching this, you might be feeling in that way. But you shared some great things on, okay, so we might often respond like this. We're probably going to feel this.
Yeah.
We're going to be in this place. But here's how we should respond.
Yeah.
I wondered if you'd just touch on some of those things.
Yeah. And I'm not sharing that in the sense of this is how we do respond, but we shouldn't.
Yeah.
No, we do respond like this, but here's how we respond in that moment when we feel these things, when it happen. I mean, I guess the first thing for me is you always fall back on the promises. Fall back on the promises of God or trust the word of God. You know, Jesus said, I will build my church. And for all the time that I've been leading Icon Church, that promise, there's not a week goes by without I'm not calling on God, reminding him of his promise. He doesn't need reminding, but I need to remind him. Do you know what I mean?
Don't we?
I need to say, I'm trusting that promise. You will build your church. That's where I'm putting my trust today.
And it sounds simple, that, doesn't it? And the idea of, you know, we say about it's his church. But actually that is a liberating thing when leaders sit back.
And you use that word overshadow.
Yeah.
The situation can overshadow, but just falling back on the promise, again, the shadow is the darkness. It brings back into light. Here's the promise.
Lifts the clouds, so to speak, doesn't it, if we want to use that language.
Yeah, and I've had moments where I've thought, let's think of how bad this could get. Jesus will still build his church.
Yeah.
I don't want it to get bad. I don't want to feel more discouraged. I don't want to. I don't want to delve deeper into the abyss.
Yeah.
But Jesus will still build his church, and I trust that, and I trust his word.
And I think just drawing that out a little bit, Paul, is the fact that's what we've experienced, hasn't it? Like in this season of COVID, I know we don't want to talk about that today, but in reality, like, the church is still growing.
Yeah,
this church is still moving. People are still becoming Christians.
Yeah.
So all that still happened in one of the worst, I suppose, times that we've been aware of in our world globally. And if that's one of the worst times, and the church is still moving forward and still being built, then that's a good way to have a bit of perspective, really.
Yeah, and I think of that promise in the context of church, but I also think about the verse where it says that the one who calls you is faithful.
Yeah.
Because I think there'll be leaders listening to this, and maybe they're not leaders in a church context, but they lead a business. And they go through the same thing. Maybe they've invested. I know, you know, when I was in the business world, we talked a lot about investing in people through training, but then being afraid that they'd leave and join a competitor. That happens. But actually, I think if you're a Christian leader, you can say the one who's called you to this position is faithful.
Yeah.
And so I think that's even in that moment where you feel discouraged, betrayed, however you feel, you actually can lean in on the promise of God. You can fall back on that.
Yeah. So what else did you share on that day with staff, because you talked about the promise.
Yeah.
There's another couple of things that I thought were very important and very helpful for the staff and team, really.
I mean, big thing that's been very helpful to me is to measure your ministry, or to measure your work. If we're thinking outside of church, measure your ministry in the people who are with you.
Yeah.
Just like Jesus, you know, he had his core, he had his 12, he had his 70, 80 or so, his 500, and then the crowds, the thousands. I think Jesus was measuring his ministry in those who were closest to him, those who were with him, those who'd given up to follow him. And I think we should do that too. That actually there will be people who are just on the fringe of things, but to measure what you're sharing, what your anointing is in those who are closest with you. It's not a phrase that I invented, measure your ministry in those who are with you. I think I heard it about 25, 30 years ago from a man called Gerald Coates. And it never left me, and it's always been helpful. So, you know, again, at times I've had to shift my focus. Where my focus has been on what's been maybe negative or overshadowing, I've been able to think about this person or this family that I can just see thriving, and just say, that's what God, I can see what God is doing. Put my focus back on what God's doing.
Do you think, I'm just thinking about this because I'm wondering whether we need to reframe what success looks like in our own eyes, rather than, you know, because every leader has their levers, and so, you know, church life can be up and down, here, there, and everywhere. I wonder if actually for ourselves we have to reframe success in the fact of measuring it by those who are with you. What's their journey looking like? Where are they going? What's their discipleship journey looking like? What's their leadership journey looking like? Where are they at? Rather than, you know, focusing on, you know, all that fringe stuff, that kind of stuff. I wonder if that'd be important.
Yeah, well, another phrase, again, someone said it. I think I heard it first from, I believe it was Francois van Niekerk, who was a pastor in South Africa at the time, and he said success is having successors. It's the same idea, really. And when you think of Jesus, you know, he called 12, he called those he wanted. That 12 was probably most of the time around 70 people who were hanging around Jesus and his ministry, particularly when he was in the region of Capernaum. But Jesus could attract crowds of 15,000, but he ministered.
Without social media.
He ministered to them. But he was inputting into the 12. And when it comes to post-resurrection, that crowd is 120. It's not 500. It's not 15,000. No. It's 120. When it comes to the day of Pentecost, 10 days later, it's just around 120. It's 120 people. And so, you know, our churches may have hundreds of people. They may not be, whatever size. But there'll be people who are receiving and responding to what God is doing. And that's where you measure. Success is having successes.
And I wonder, just picking up what Nathan was saying there about this idea of measuring your success, because that's a big thing for a leader, isn't it, really? Especially if there's a bit of shift and a bit of change in church, and people come and people go. And I suppose we've got to be realistic in the sense, like, even with Jesus, not only did the crowd leave him when he gave him that challenge, but when we get to the cross, of course, most of the disciples were running as well, weren't they? And running the opposite direction.
Yeah, especially Peter.
Especially Peter. So I think it's even going beyond that confidence has got to be in who we are in God, not just on how are those around me doing. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the next step up. But if you can't get the first bit of who am I and what's God doing in my life, then the second part doesn't really make sense, I don't think.
No, good. You mentioned, obviously, things for us to do in terms of, like, responding, you know, to some of that discouragement, falling back on the promise, how we measure. But what about with those people? Because you talked about, obviously, there's a discipleship issue, but also for the leader, it's a discipleship issue as well. So how do you let people go?
Yeah. Well, I think that also you've got to let people go with grace, you know, wherever you can. And sometimes that's like you say, it's a discipleship issue for you as a leader. You've got to fight Sometimes you want to argue. Sometimes you want to tell everybody. Sometimes you want to make an announcement in the church. Do you know this person? Do you know?
Has done these 5 things against me. Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it, for leaders, really?
You know what? You can't let people know. You can't tell. And we've always tried, Jeannie and myself and the other leaders here at Icon Church, we've always tried to protect people, even people who were doing us harm. We've sought to protect them. We've never gone public. And we could have gone public. And, I could bring a stack of emails and read them out.
That's a very large stack, though.
Seriously, and I could.
And that's just last week, isn't it?
I could get a sympathy of but we have always said we won't do that. We'll let people go with grace. We'll be gracious. We'll forgive, because that's a discipleship issue for the leader to forgive. But just like when you forgive an abuser. You don't submit yourself to the abuse. And the same is true in church. When somebody wants to do the church harm, the leaders have to protect the church from that, but they also have to forgive the person. So you let people go with grace. And you also, because you're relying on the promise, you look for the new.
Great.
And you look for the next, and you look for the upgrade. I've always prayed that and believed that. Not that people are a commodity, they're not, but that in God's heart, he wants you to keep going forward. And so if you've lost something that matters, if you've lost something that was useful, was helpful and working with you, I think God has got a plan to not just replace that, but actually to take it to another level. And Jesus said that, I think, to his disciples when he said, the disciples said, we've left all this stuff. And Jesus said, hey, let me tell you, in this life, you'll receive 100 times more than what you think you've lost.
That's great.
So this is my kind of last thing is you look for the new, you look for the next, you look for the upgrade.
Well, that's it for this episode, and it's been great to chat around this topic. Every leader has their levers, and if this helped you, then please get in touch, let us know. You can find on icon.church/open PDF of those notes from that staff meeting, as well as you'll be able to find all the show notes for the Church Explained podcast. Let me encourage you to rate, review, subscribe, do whatever, wherever you're consuming this content, and please share this. Maybe this will help a church leader. Maybe you've been having a conversation with someone even around this subject, and this would help them. Then please share it, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Church Explained podcast.